I never thought I would be the kind of woman who would change the locks on her own son. But there I was at 72, standing in my kitchen at 6 in the morning, watching a locksmith install new deadbolts, while my hands shook around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The call had come at 3 in the morning. Not unusual for Michael. He had been calling at all hours for the past 5 years, ever since his father died, and left me with more money than I knew what to do with. This time, though, something was different in his voice. Not the usual manufactured panic about an emergency loan or a business opportunity that needed immediate funding. This time he sounded almost bored when he told me he needed $40,000 by noon. $40,000. For what? I had asked. For none of your business, he had said, his voice sharp in a way that made my chest tighten. You have it, so just transfer it. I do not have time for your questions, Mom. I had been asking myself the same question for months now. When had my son started talking to me like I was an inconvenience? When had I become nothing more than a bank account with a heartbeat? But that night, as I sat in the darkness of my bedroom, listening to the dial tone, a different question formed in my mind. When had I started allowing it? The next morning brought clarity in the form of my monthly bank statements scattered across my dining room table. I had been avoiding them for weeks, trusting Michael when he said he was helping me manage my finances. Better to let someone younger handle the complicated stuff, he had said. You should be enjoying your retirement, not worrying about investments and tax implications. But now, with my reading glasses perched on my nose and a yellow legal pad beside me, I began to trace the patterns I had been too trusting to see before. The monthly transfers to Michael's account had started small. 500 here, 1,000 there. Gas money, he had called it. Help with groceries while he got back on his feet after his divorce. Then the amounts had grown. 3,000 for a security deposit on a new apartment. 8,000 for a reliable car. 15,000 for what he described as a business loan that would be paid back with interest within 6 months. That was 18 months ago. I found myself writing down dates and amounts, my neat handwriting filling page after page. The picture that emerged made my stomach clench with a familiar knot of anxiety that I had been carrying for so long. I had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. In the past 3 years, I had given Michael over $200,000, not loaned, given, because every time I had mentioned repayment, he had found a way to make me feel selfish for bringing it up. But it was not just the money, I realized as I continued my inventory. It was the way he had slowly inserted himself into every aspect of my life. The way he had convinced me to add his name to my checking account for emergencies. The way he had taken over paying my bills because it was easier for him to handle everything online. The way he had gradually moved his belongings into my spare room, then my garage, then my basement, until my own home felt like a storage unit for his life. The way he had made me feel guilty for wanting to spend my own money on myself. 2 weeks earlier, I had mentioned wanting to take a cruise to Alaska, something Harold and I had always planned to do together. Michael had laughed. Not the warm laugh I remembered from his childhood, but something cold and dismissive. At your age, Mom? What if you get sick on the ship? What if something happens and I cannot reach you? Besides, do you really think it is wise to spend that kind of money when I am still trying to get the business off the ground? I had canceled the cruise that afternoon. Later that day, I called my sister Janet for the first time in months. We had grown distant since Harold's death, partly because Michael had made it clear that he did not approve of her influence on me. She fills your head with ideas, he would say whenever I mentioned a conversation with her. She just wants your money too, you know. She has never gotten over Dad leaving everything to you instead of splitting it. But when I heard Janet's voice on the phone, warm and concerned in a way I had forgotten voices could be, something inside me cracked open. I found myself telling her about the bank statements about the late-night calls, about the way I had begun to feel like a stranger in my own life. There was a long silence after I finished talking. Then Janet asked a question that made me realize how far I had drifted from any kind of normal relationship with my son. When was the last time Michael asked how you were doing without following it up with a request for money? I could not answer her. The silence stretched between us until Janet spoke again, her voice gentle but firm. I think you need to talk to someone, she said. Someone who can help you see this situation clearly. Because from where I am sitting, it sounds like Michael is not treating you like his mother. He is treating you like his personal bank. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and thinking about the woman I used to be. Before Harold got sick, before the long months of caregiving that had exhausted me in ways I was still recovering from, before the grief that had made me so grateful for any kind of companionship, that I had not noticed how Michael's presence in my life had shifted from comfort to control. I had been a strong woman once. I had raised 3 children largely on my own, while Harold worked long hours building his construction business. I had managed our household finances, made decisions about investments and insurance, handled contractors and dealt with lawyers. I had been competent and confident and capable. When had I started second-guessing every decision? When had I started asking Michael's permission to spend money that was rightfully mine? The next morning, I made an appointment with Sarah Chen, an elder law attorney Janet had recommended. I told myself I was just gathering information, just wanting to understand my options. But as I sat in Sarah's office 3 days later, listening to her explain terms like financial abuse and elder exploitation, I felt something I had not experienced in years. I felt angry. Not the sad, frustrated anger that came with feeling helpless, but a clean, bright anger that made me sit up straighter in my chair. Michael had been systematically isolating me from friends and family, taking control of my finances, and making me doubt my own judgment. Sarah had a name for what he was doing, and hearing it spoken aloud in her calm, professional voice made me realize that I was not losing my mind or being overly sensitive. I was being manipulated by my own son. Sarah helped me understand that the joint account I had set up for emergencies had given Michael legal access to my money, but that did not make his actions ethical or appropriate. She explained how I could remove his access, how I could set up safeguards to protect myself, how I could take back control of my financial life. But more importantly, she helped me understand that taking these steps was not a betrayal of my love for Michael. It was an act of self-preservation that was long overdue. Meanwhile, Michael seemed to sense that something had shifted. His calls became more frequent, his requests more urgent. When I hesitated to transfer money for what he described as a crucial business expense, he showed up at my house unannounced, his key still working because I had not yet found the courage to change the locks. I remember the way he stood in my kitchen that day, his face flushed with the kind of entitled indignation I had seen too many times before. "You are being ridiculous," he said, pacing back and forth across the linoleum floor Harold and I had installed together 20 years earlier. "I am trying to build something here, and you are sabotaging me because Janet put ideas in your head." He was right about Janet putting ideas in my head, but they were not the ideas he thought. She had reminded me that I deserved to be treated with respect. She had reminded me that my money was mine to spend as I chose. She had reminded me that love should not come with a price tag attached. "I am not sabotaging you," I said quietly, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I am protecting myself." Michael's expression shifted then, from anger to something that looked almost like panic. "Protecting yourself from what? From me? I am your son, Mom. Everything I do is for our family." But as I looked at him standing in my kitchen, demanding access to money I had worked my entire life to save, I realized that his version of family looked very different from mine. In his version, I existed to fund his dreams and ask no questions. In his version, my needs and wishes were secondary to his comfort and convenience. In his version, I was not a person deserving of respect and consideration. I was a resource to be managed and depleted. The confrontation that finally changed everything happened on a Tuesday in October. I had been working with Sarah for several weeks by then, quietly removing Michael's access to my accounts and setting up new safeguards for my finances. I had not told him about these changes, partly because Sarah had advised me to move carefully, and partly because I was not ready for the fight I knew would come. But Michael discovered the changes when one of his automatic transfers was declined. He called me at 8 in the morning, his voice shaking with rage, in a way that made my hands tremble as I held the phone. "What did you do?" it demanded. "My payment for the warehouse space bounced. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? Do you understand that you just cost me a crucial business opportunity?" I found myself apologizing automatically, the way I had trained myself to do whenever Michael was upset. But even as the words left my mouth, I felt something inside me rebel against them. Why was I sorry for protecting my own money? Why was I taking responsibility for his financial planning? The conversation escalated quickly from there. Michael accused me of being selfish and paranoid. He said I was destroying our relationship over money that I would never be able to spend anyway. He reminded me of all the ways he had helped me since Harold died, all the times he had been there when I needed him. But then he said something that cut through all my confusion and guilt, like a blade through tissue paper. "You owe me this," he said, his voice cold and certain. "After everything I have sacrificed for you, after all the time I have spent managing your life, you owe me this money. I have earned it." The silence that followed felt like a physical thing, pressing down on both of us. In that silence, I finally heard what my son really thought of me. Not as a mother who deserved love and respect, but as a debt to be collected. Not as a person with her own dreams and needs, but as an obligation that he resented having to fulfill. I hung up the phone without saying another word. The next morning, I called the locksmith. Changing the locks was just the beginning. Over the following weeks, I began the slow work of reclaiming my life. I closed the joint bank account and opened new ones that only I could access. I changed my will to reflect my new understanding of my relationship with Michael. I started returning calls from friends I had gradually lost touch with over the past few years. Most importantly, I started making plans for my own future instead of funding Michael's. The Alaska cruise I had wanted to take was booked solid for the next year. But I found a river cruise through Europe that looked even more appealing. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center and discovered that I had a talent for capturing light that surprised me. I began volunteering at the library, reading to children whose excitement about stories reminded me of the joy I had once found in books. Michael tried everything to regain access to my money and my compliance. He showed up at my house and pounded on the door until the neighbors called the police. He sent long, emotional emails about how much he loved me and how sorry he was for the misunderstanding. He had Janet's phone number somehow and called her repeatedly, trying to convince her to intervene on his behalf. When none of that worked, he tried a different approach. He brought his new girlfriend to my house one Sunday afternoon, a young woman named Ashley, who smiled too brightly and called me Grandma, even though Michael had no children. They sat in my living room and talked about how worried they were about me, how isolation and paranoia were common in elderly people, how Michael just wanted to help me manage the complexities of modern financial life. I listened to them with the politeness Harold had taught me to show to guests, offering them coffee and asking Ashley about her work. But inside, I felt a calm certainty that I had not experienced in years. I was not paranoid or confused. I was finally thinking clearly. After they left, I called Sarah and asked her to draft a letter explaining that any future contact from Michael should go through her office. I was done trying to manage his emotions or protect his feelings. I was done accepting responsibility for his choices and their consequences. The holidays that year were quiet in a way they had not been since Harold died. I spent Thanksgiving with Janet and her family. laughing around her dining room table in a way that made my cheeks ache from disuse. I spent Christmas morning opening presents I had bought for myself. Small luxuries I had been denying myself for years because Michael always seemed to need the money more. On New Year's Eve, I sat in my living room with a glass of champagne and a photo album filled with pictures of Harold and me from our 43 years of marriage. In those photos, I could see the woman I had been before grief and loneliness had made me vulnerable to Michael's manipulation. She looked confident and happy, secure in her own worth, and unafraid to take up space in the world. I wanted to be her again. The legal proceedings took most of the following year. Sarah helped me document the extent of Michael's financial exploitation and pursue restitution through the courts. It was not about the money, although recovering some of what he had taken did provide a sense of justice that surprised me with its intensity. It was about establishing clear boundaries and consequences for his behavior. It was about refusing to be a victim anymore. Michael fought the proceedings every step of the way, hiring lawyers and filing countersuits that accused me of elder abuse for cutting off his access to my money. He tried to have me declared incompetent, bringing in witnesses who testified about my supposed confusion and paranoia. He painted himself as a devoted son who had sacrificed his own opportunities to care for his aging mother. But the evidence was overwhelming. The bank records, the recorded phone calls Sarah had advised me to make, the testimony of friends and family members who had watched Michael isolate and control me. The judge who heard the case was a woman about my age, who listened to the evidence with an expression that grew more stern as the proceedings continued. When she ruled in my favor, ordering Michael to repay the money he had taken, and establishing a restraining order that prevented him from contacting me directly, I felt something I had not experienced since Harold's death. I felt proud of myself. The money Michael was ordered to repay came slowly and grudgingly, often requiring additional legal action to enforce the court's ruling. But I found that I cared less about the financial recovery than I had expected. The real victory was the space I had created in my life, the freedom to make decisions based on my own wants and needs, rather than someone else's demands and expectations. I used some of the recovered money to take that European river cruise, floating through medieval towns and Renaissance cities with a group of other travelers who became unlikely friends. I used more of it to renovate my kitchen, installing the granite countertops Harold and I had always talked about but never quite gotten around to choosing. But mostly I used my newfound freedom to rediscover who I was when I was not being diminished by someone else's selfishness. 2 years after I changed those locks, I received a card in the mail with no return address. Inside, in handwriting I did not recognize, was a brief note from Michael. It said that he was sorry for how things had ended between us, that he missed me, and that he hoped someday we could find a way to repair our relationship. I read the card twice, looking for the request for money that I was sure would be buried somewhere in the carefully chosen words, but it was not there. Just an apology and an expression of regret that sounded, for the first time in years, like it might be genuine. I kept the card for several days, propping it up on my kitchen counter where I could see it while I drank my morning coffee. I found myself thinking about the little boy Michael had been, the one who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and tell me they were the most beautiful flowers in the world. I thought about the young man who had called me every week during his first year of college, sharing stories about his classes and his new friends with an enthusiasm that made me smile. I missed that version of my son, but I also understood that missing him did not mean I had to accept mistreatment from the man he had become. Eventually, I put the card in a box with other mementos from Michael's childhood and placed the box in the back of my closet. I did not throw it away, but I did not display it either. It existed in a middle space, like my feelings about my son himself. Last month, I celebrated my 75th birthday with a party Janet organized in my backyard. Friends from my watercolor class mingled with neighbors I had grown closer to over the past few years, and volunteers from the library where I still read to children every Tuesday morning. The cake was chocolate with vanilla frosting, my favorite combination that I had not requested in years, because Michael always insisted that lemon was better for older people. As I sat in my garden that evening, surrounded by people who valued my company for reasons that had nothing to do with my bank account, I thought about the woman I had been 3 years earlier. She had been so afraid of being alone that she had accepted being diminished. She had been so desperate for any kind of connection that she had allowed someone to treat her like an ATM with a heartbeat. That woman felt like a stranger to me now, someone I might pity but no longer recognize as myself. These days, I wake up each morning with a sense of possibility that I had forgotten was available to me. I make plans based on my own interests and desires. I spend my money on things that bring me joy rather than funding someone else's dreams. I have learned to distinguish between loneliness and solitude, and discovered that I actually enjoy my own company in ways that surprise me. I still miss Harold every day, and probably always will, but I no longer mistake that grief for a reason to accept less than I deserve from the people in my life. I have learned that love without respect is not really love at all, and that being someone's mother does not make me responsible for enabling their worst impulses. Most importantly, I have learned that it is never too late to stand up for yourself, even when the person you need to stand up to is someone you love. Especially then. The locks on my doors are still new and bright, a daily reminder of the choice I made to protect myself when no one else would. Every time I turn the key, I remember that I am worth protecting, that my peace of mind and financial security matter, that my needs and wishes deserve consideration. I am no longer the woman who would change her plans because someone else disapproved of them. I am no longer the woman who would apologize for spending her own money on herself. I am no longer the woman who would mistake manipulation for love or control for care. I am a woman who knows her own worth, and I will never forget that lesson again.